I'm sorry. We're fully booked.
We have a reservation. The name is Okafor.
The woman at the host stand said it without looking up from the iPad in her hand. The couple standing in front of her were not difficult to look at. The man was 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that fit him the way a dark suit fits a man who has worn them long enough to stop thinking about it. The woman beside him was the kind of beautiful that made strangers lose their sentence midway through. High cheekbones, brown skin that caught the light in the specific way of someone who was not performing anything, and the effortless posture of a woman who had long since stopped being surprised by her own effect on rooms. They had a reservation, 8 o'clock. The name was Okafor. The man said, "We have a reservation. The name is Okafor." The woman with the iPad looked up. She looked at them. She looked at the iPad. She said, "I don't see it," he said. "I made it 4 days ago. Confirmation number 7741, she said. "Our system may have had the manager appeared. His name was Scott Vance. He was 40 years old and had managed Alderman's on 5th for 3 years and had learned in 3 years the specific calculation of which tables went to which guests, and when the calculation was worth making." He looked at the couple. He said, "I'm sorry, we're fully booked tonight." She looked at the dining room behind him, 4 empty tables. She said, "We can see the dining room." He said, "Those are reserved," she said. "I'd like to speak with the owner," he said. "The owner isn't available." He was wrong about that. And in 11 minutes, the owner was going to walk through the front door of Alderman's on 5th, and the dining room was going to become very quiet. And Scott Vance was going to understand exactly what fully booked was going to cost him. Stay with this story. Subscribe, because who walks through that door is not what Scott Vance was expecting when he said the owner isn't available. And it is not something the restaurant was going to recover from easily. But to understand that moment, you have to understand who was standing at the host's stand. Both of them. Alderman's on 5th had been open for 22 years. It occupied a converted warehouse space in Caldwell's historic district. Exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of restaurant that had earned its reputation over 2 decades through the specific, unremarkable excellence of doing one thing very well every single night. It had a Michelin star. It had a 3-month waiting list for its private dining room. It had been reviewed, over 22 years, by every publication that reviewed restaurants, and the reviews had been consistent in the way that only genuine quality sustained. Scott Vance had been the floor manager for 3 years. He was competent in the way that floor managers were competent. He knew the reservation system, the seating priorities, the specific choreography of a busy service. He had managed the dining room through 2 difficult years and had maintained the standard. He had also, in 3 years, developed a specific and quiet practice that existed in the gaps between the standard, the way certain reservation names were checked twice, the way certain couples at the host stand received a slightly longer assessment before they were seated, the way certain tables that were technically available became unavailable in the moment of the assessment. He had never been called on it directly. The practice had existed in the gaps because the gaps existed. The couple at the host stand on a Thursday evening in October were the Okafors. He had made the assessment. He had made it in 4 seconds. And that was the thing Scott Vance never saw coming. Her name was Dr. Adiz Renee Okafor. She was 38 years old. She was a cardiologist at Caldwell General Hospital, not a general cardiologist, a specialist in interventional cardiology, which was the specific, high-stakes subspecialty that required not just medical knowledge, but the particular combination of technical precision and absolute composure that only certain people possessed. She had been performing cardiac catheterization since she was 31. She had done over 2,000 procedures in 7 years. She had, in those 7 years, saved lives in the specific, undeniable way that cardiac intervention saved lives, by being in the right place with the right skill at the right moment and not making mistakes. She had grown up in Savannah, Georgia, the daughter of a dentist and a high school principal, in a house that understood 2 things with absolute conviction. That excellence was the only argument worth making, and that no room had the right to decide your worth before you demonstrated it. Her mother had told her, at 12 years old, after an incident at a school that had decided something about her before she demonstrated anything, you don't argue with small rooms. You walk into larger ones. She had been walking into larger rooms ever since. She was at Alderman's on 5th on a Thursday evening because it was her anniversary. 7 years. Her husband, Marcus, had made the reservation 4 days ago, confirmation number 7741, and had brought her to the restaurant in the dark suit that fit him the way. A dark suit fit a man who had stopped thinking about it, and she was in the black dress that her sister had said made her look like the answer to a question nobody had asked yet. She had said, "I'd like to speak with the owner." Scott Vance had said, "The owner isn't available." She had looked at the dining room. She had looked at Scott Vance. She had said, "All right." She had taken out her phone. Her husband's name was Marcus Elias Acaffer. He was 41 years old. He was the city editor of the Caldwell Gazette, the city's oldest newspaper, which he had joined as a reporter 15 years ago, and had risen to his current position through the specific, patient work of someone who understood that the city was always telling a story, and that the story needed someone paying attention. He was a large man, 6'2", broad, the kind of physically imposing that was completely irrelevant to what he actually was, which was the most careful reader in any room he entered. He read everything. He read people the way he read text, for what was said and what was not said, and what the gap between those two things meant. He had read the host stand in 2 seconds. He had read Scott Vance in 4. He had not said anything yet because his wife had said she'd like to speak with the owner. And he had learned in 7 years of marriage that when Adiz said a thing, the right response was to give her the room. He had given her the room. She had taken out her phone. She had made a call. The owner of Alderman's on 5th was a woman named Gloria Mensa. She was 63 years old. She had opened the restaurant 22 years ago with her late husband, Thomas, and had run it since, not from the back, not from a distance, but from the specific, present involvement of someone who understood that a restaurant was a living thing that required daily attention. She had left the restaurant at 9 o'clock that evening, because she had a board meeting at the hospital at 7 the following morning, and she had learned in 22 years that the restaurant survived her absences because she had built a staff that knew the standard and maintained it. She had not known about Scott Vance's practice. She had not known because the practice existed in the gaps and because nobody in the restaurant had brought it to her attention. She had been home for 40 minutes when her phone rang. The number was not one she recognized. She answered. The voice said, "Ms. Mensa, my name is Adiz Acaffer. I'm a cardiologist at Caldwell General. I have a reservation at your restaurant for 8 o'clock this evening. Confirmation number 7741. I've been told the restaurant is fully booked and the owner isn't available. I'm calling because I'd like to speak with you directly." Gloria said, "Dr. Acaffer," she said, "how did you get this number?" Adiz said, "You're on the board of Caldwell General, so am I. Your number is in the hospital directory." Gloria was quiet for a moment. She said, "Tell me what happened." She told her specifically, chronologically, without editorial. Gloria said, "Is your husband still with you?" She said, "Yes." Gloria said, "Stay where you are." She hung up. She picked up her coat. She drove to Alderman's, 11 minutes. She came through the front door at 8:22. She was 63 years old and 5'3", and she wore no pretense of any kind. She walked in the specific, unhurried way of a person who owns the room because they built it and have been maintaining it for 22 years. She looked at the host stand. She looked at the dining room. She looked at Scott Vance. She said, "Where are the Acafors?" He said, "Mrs. Mensa," she said. "Scott, where are the Acafors?" He said, "There." They stepped to the side. She found them near the entrance, standing in the small waiting area, composed. The way people are composed when they have decided that composure is the correct response to what they are experiencing. She walked to them. She said, "Dr. Acaffer, Mr. Acaffer, I'm Gloria Mensa. This is my restaurant," she said. "I'm deeply sorry for what happened at this door tonight," she said. "Will you please come in?" She turned and walked to the dining room. She stopped at the best table in the house, the corner window, the one she kept for guests she wanted to honor, the one that looked at the historic district's lights. She said, "Please sit." They sat. She sat across from them. She said, "Tell me what happened. I want to hear it from you." Marcus said, "Your manager told us you were fully booked. We had a reservation. We could see empty tables." She said, "Yes." He said, "He said you weren't available." She said, "I know." She looked at the table. She said, "I want to be honest with you. What you experienced tonight, I cannot tell you for certain what was in Scott's mind. What I can tell you is what you saw, and what you saw was an empty table and a manager who told you the restaurant was booked." She said, "I've been running this restaurant for 22 years. My husband and I built it because we believed that a restaurant was a place where everyone who walked through the door was a guest. Not some people. Everyone," she said. "What happened at this door tonight is not consistent with what I built." She said, "I would like you to stay for dinner, on me. Not as a gesture, as the evening you came here for." She looked at Adiz. She said, "Dr. Akafer, you said it's your anniversary." Adiz said, 7 years, Gloria said. "Happy anniversary," she said. "I'll send your server." She stood. She walked back toward the front. She found Scott Vance in the manager's station. She said, "My office, now." The conversation lasted 22 minutes. She asked questions. He answered them. She did not raise her voice because raising her voice was not useful, and she had learned in 63 years to be precise about what was useful. What she established was what she had suspected when Adiz described the situation over the phone, that this had not been the first time, that it was a pattern, that the pattern had a structure, the assessment at the host stand, the unavailability of certain tables, the timing of when reservations disappeared from the system. She established all of this in 22 minutes through specific questions and specific answers, because Scott Vance was a man who did not lie well under direct questioning, which was a characteristic she had observed in managers before and which was useful now. She said, "How many times?" He said, "I don't know exactly." She said, "Estimate." He was quiet. She said, "Scott." He said, "Maybe a dozen." "Over 3 years," she said, "in a restaurant that serves 400 covers a week." He said, "Yes," she said, "in my restaurant." He said, "I thought," she said. "What did you think?" He said, "I thought I was maintaining the standard." She said, "Whose standard?" He did not answer. She said, "The standard of this restaurant is that the door is open to everyone who walks through it with a reservation and the means to pay for a meal. That has been the standard for 22 years, she said. "What you have been doing is not my standard," she said. "You're terminated effective tonight. HR will process your separation. You'll receive what you're owed." He said, "Mrs. Mensah," she said, "you may go." He went. She sat in her office for a moment. She thought about Thomas, about the night they had opened, 22 years ago, the specific, terrifying joy of the first service in a restaurant they had built from nothing. About what he had said that night when the last guest left and they were alone in the dining room. "This is the thing, Gloria. This is the thing we're going to tend." She had been tending it. She had not known about the gaps. Now she did. She stood. She went back to the dining room. She stopped at the corner window table. The Okafors were halfway through their dinner. The server, a woman named Priya who had been at the restaurant for 6 years, and who ran her section with the specific, warm professionalism of someone who loved the work, had brought them through the amuse-bouche and the first course and had, without being asked, selected a wine pairing that Marcus had not expected, and that Adiz had raised an eyebrow at. In the way, she raised an eyebrow at things that surprised her pleasantly. Gloria came to the table. She said, "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "I want to tell you what I've done," she told them. Not the details of the conversation with Scott, those were between her and a former employee, but the outcome and what it meant. She said, "He's no longer with the restaurant," she said. "I also want to tell you something else," she said. "I've been running this restaurant for 22 years. I built it with my husband. He died 6 years ago. Every day I come in here, I'm tending something he loved, she said. What happened at this door tonight is a failure I'm going to carry. Not because it happened to someone important, she looked at them. Forgive me, but I mean, not because of who you are professionally. Because it happened to people who came through this door for a meal on their anniversary, she said. That is the failure. The rest, who you are, what you do, that's separate. The failure was at the door, Adiz said. I appreciate you saying that, Gloria said. I mean it, Marcus said. Ms. Mensah. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course, he said. What are you going to do beyond tonight? She said. What do you mean? He said. The pattern you found. 12 incidents in 3 years. That's not one person making a bad decision. That's a gap in the structure that allowed it to happen, she said. Yes, he said. What are you going to do about the structure? She was quiet for a moment. She said, that's the right question, she said. I don't have a complete answer yet. I need to understand the full scope of what happened before I know what the structure needs, she said. I'd like to talk to you about that. Not tonight. Tonight is your anniversary, she said. But if you're willing, I'd like your perspective on what you experienced. On what it would have taken to make it right, Marcus said. We can do that, she said. Thank you, she said. Enjoy your dinner. She went back to the host stand. She took over the position herself for the remainder of service, not because she needed to, but because it was the right thing to be present for on this particular night. 3 people came to the door in the next 2 hours. She greeted all 3. 2 had reservations. 1 did not, a couple who had been in the neighborhood and had hoped for a table. She found them one. The dining room was full. Everyone who came through the door came in. Marcus wrote the story. Not the night it happened. He was the city editor, not the beat reporter, and he understood the difference between a story that was his to tell and one that was his to assign. He assigned it. The reporter he assigned it to was a young woman named Kezia Hale, 26 years old, 2 years at the Gazette, who understood the kind of story this was and who approached it with the specific, careful rigor of someone who wanted to get it right. She interviewed Adiz. She interviewed Gloria Mensah. She tried to interview Scott Vance, who declined through a lawyer. She interviewed Priya, the server, who had seen what happened at the host stand and who had been relieved. She said that the Okaforce came in not because of who they were but because she had wanted, for a long time, to be in a restaurant where the door stayed open. She wrote the story in the specific, clear, factual language of good newspaper journalism. What happened in sequence, without editorializing, with the specific details that let the reader see the scene. The story ran on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, it had been read 40,000 times. By Saturday, it had been shared in cities the Gazette had never reached. Gloria Mensah received 114 calls on Saturday. She answered the ones she could. She thanked people for reaching out. She said what she had been saying since Thursday, that the failure was real and the response was real and the restaurant was still there and the door was still open. She also received a call from the Michelin inspector's office. She answered that call in her office with the door closed. She did not describe the call to anyone. She went back to the floor. The Okaforce met with Gloria 3 weeks after the dinner. Not at the restaurant, at a coffee shop on the east side of town, the specific, neutral territory of a conversation that was not about the restaurant, but about what the restaurant needed to understand about what had happened and why. Adiz said, the pattern Scott had 12 incidents in 3 years. That didn't happen in isolation. Gloria said, no, Adiz said. Something in the environment made it possible. Made it feel safe, normal. Gloria said, yes, Adiz said. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Gloria said, no. But I'm glad you're saying it, she said. I've been thinking about the structure, about what allowed the gaps to exist. And I think the honest answer is that I wasn't present enough in the specific moments where the gaps were happening. I was present for the standard of the food and the service. I wasn't present for the standard of who came through the door. Adiz said, how do you fix that? Gloria said, you audit the gaps. You look at the data, reservation patterns, seating assignments, which tables went to which guests. You look for what the data shows, she said. I've started, she said. In 3 years, the data shows 11 other incidents that match the pattern, different guests. Same sequence, she said. I can't make those right in the way that would actually make them right. Those people came through a door and experienced something they should not have experienced in a restaurant I built, she said. What I can do is make sure it doesn't happen again. And be honest about the fact that it happened. Adiz said, the honesty matters, Gloria said. I know, she said, Dr. Akafer. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask, Gloria said. Why did you call me instead of leaving? Adiz said, because leaving was the easier thing, and easier things don't change anything, she said. My mother told me, you don't argue with small rooms, you walk into larger ones. But sometimes the larger room requires you to go back to the small one and make it larger, Gloria said. That's what you did, Adiz said. I called the number in the hospital directory, Gloria said. Yes. But that was a choice, she said. Most people would have left. Adiz said, most people have left. That's why Scott had 12 incidents. Gloria was quiet. She said, I'm going to put that on the wall in my office. Adiz said, don't put it on the wall, put it in the training. Gloria looked at her. Then she laughed, a real one, the kind that arrived from somewhere she had not expected. She said, you're right, she said. I will. The structural audit was completed in 6 weeks. It examined 4 years of reservation and seating data. It identified 14 incidents that matched the pattern, 3 more that had not appeared in the initial review. Gloria wrote a letter. It was addressed to the 14 guests she had identified. It described what had happened and what she had found and what she was going to do about it. She sent it to 13 of them. She did not send the 14th. She could not locate the 14th family, who had made a reservation under a name that had appeared in the system and then disappeared, which was the specific, visible mark of what Scott had been doing. The letters produced 8 responses. 2 of the 8 said they had known something was wrong and had not said anything because they had not believed saying anything would matter. She responded to each of them personally. She said, it matters. I needed someone to say it for me to know. I'm sorry it took this long. She established a standing community table at Alderman's, the first Saturday of every month, a prefixed dinner open to the public by lottery, free of charge. For 8 guests from the neighborhood. Not a charity event, a meal, the standard of Alderman's on 5th, available to everyone who walked through the door. Thomas had always said the restaurant was for the city. She was making it true. 7 months after the Thursday in October, the Okafors came back to Alderman's. Not for their anniversary, that had been taken care of. They came for a Tuesday evening, a regular dinner, the kind of dinner that people have at a restaurant they trust. Priya was their server again. She remembered them. She brought the wine pairing before they asked. She described the new additions to the menu with the specific warmth of someone who cared about what they were describing. They ate. After the meal, Gloria came to the table. She said, how was everything? Marcus said, good. Better than the last time, she said. I should hope so. Adiz said, the community table. Gloria said, the first one was last month. Adiz said, we saw the pictures. Gloria said. 8 guests. 3 of them from the east side. One of them was a woman who had tried to make a reservation here 4 years ago and been told we were fully booked. She said. She came for the community table. She said she'd never been in a restaurant like this. She said. I sat with her during the meal, she said. I want to keep doing that, sitting with the guests. Being present in the room. Adiz said, that's the whole thing. Gloria said, I know, she said. I should have known it before. Adiz said, you know it now. Gloria said, yes, she said. Happy Tuesday, Doctor. Akafer, Adiz said, "Happy Tuesday, Ms. Mensah." Gloria went back to the floor. She stopped at the host's stand. She stood there for a few minutes, the way she had stood there in the early years, when she and Thomas were learning what they were building, and the standing at the door was part of the learning. The door opened. A couple came in. Young, first-date energy, the specific, slightly elevated posture of two people trying to seem comfortable with each other. She said, "Good evening. Welcome to Alderman's." She meant it the way Thomas had meant it. She meant it every time. The door was the whole thing. The door was always the whole thing. There is a kind of ownership that is not in the deed. It is in the door, in what the door says about who is welcome, who is expected, who belongs in the room on the other side of it. Gloria Mensah owned the building and the kitchen, and the 22 years of reputation, and the single Michelin star, and the 3-month waiting list for the private dining room. She also owned what had happened at the door on a Thursday evening in October, whether she had known about it or not. Ownership is not only the good parts. She found out because Adiz Akaffer called a number in a hospital directory instead of walking away. She responded because she understood what ownership required. She audited and found 14 incidents and wrote 13 letters, and established a community table and stood at the door on Tuesday evenings. She tended what Thomas had loved. She did it better than she had before, because someone had called. Here is the question this story leaves behind. What door in your life has been closed, by assumption, by habit? By the comfortable gap between who you say you are and who you actually are in the moment, that you have not examined because nobody has called? And what would you do if they did? If this story stayed with you, share it, subscribe, stay close. The next one is coming, and it starts the same way, with a door that should have been open, and ending the same way, with someone making it so. Drop a comment, tell me, who called when it would have been easier to walk away. Let them be seen even here, even now, because everybody deserves to be seen.